The church is called to care for creation, and it's also called to care for the hungry. And each of these problems on their own are massive and are seemingly unsolvable. How do you fix all the damage we've done to this world? How do you make sure that every person is fed in a world where things are just getting so expensive? But when you combine these two problems together, there's a solution that appears that is really simple and it solves both. We can repair creation while feeding the hungry, high quality organic food, better than organic food because it doesn't even have the organic sprays, for as little as 4 cents per pound. So let's take a quick glance at what those problems are and how they fit together. I'll give you the few-minute version of this presentation and give you an introduction and then show you an existing project before we dive a little bit deeper into how to design, install, maintain, and use your orchard as a ministry tool. So quick note, this presentation is many presentations in one. I normally try and simplify my presentations as much as I can, kind of like the 3-point sermon, giving you a few take-home points. But in this case, this is a resource that I'm hoping that you'll come back to, that you will reference it or reference the book that I'll be releasing under the same title, or just reaching out to me as you reach each step in your ministry. This is a guide for you, something for you to refer to. So it is going to be a little complicated. It is going to be a lot of information. I'm going to try and keep it as simple as I can. So the first few minutes are all the essential concepts that you'll need, and the rest of the presentation will expand on these. So don't worry about memorizing anything. That is what the playback is for. So statistics are tricky. 1 in 6 households doesn't have reliable access to food. But what does that mean? Well, if you live in a block like mine, then we have about 6 houses on each side of the road here, which means that 2 of these houses don't have good access to food. That includes the kids who may go hungry because there simply isn't enough money to buy food. But the other 10 on this block are all right, right? Well, the statistics define food security in a way that doesn't mean that they have access to good food. It just means they have access to food, and that food that they have access to for about half of the homes, for more than half the homes on my street. I'm on an average block in town, and I know who's going on here. I know the people. I interact with the kids on the street, and I know that more than half of the families here are eating nutritionally void junk that doesn't allow their wonderfully designed bodies to function as designed, which includes fighting off sickness. So, can you afford to make sure that your neighbors aren't hungry? Maybe you can. Maybe you're one of those pastors who's, making $1 million a year, and you can afford to make sure that everyone on your street has access to, prime rib and foie gras and fresh salad and fruits and everything. But these are just your physical neighbors. And Jesus made it pretty clear that our neighbor is anyone that we interact with. It's every person we walk by. It's every person that he created intentionally. That's, up to half of the kids at school who don't have access to the food that will help them to learn properly so that they can get the good jobs, so that they can make sure that their kids aren't hungry. That's half of your coworkers. That's half of the people you buy your groceries from, or half of the people that you buy your coffees from. Meanwhile, as churches, we're maintaining these grass spaces and ornamental landscapes that oftentimes do more harm than good for creation. Our properties become an example of poor stewardship for anyone who's actually paying attention. So let's take a peek at that solution. And this is community orchards. This is edible landscaping. And it's not an average orchard. It is not a regular community garden. And we're going to look at how it reduces maintenance burdens as well. So we do ecosystem-based design. Traditionally designed orchards are reliant on pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers, and we're able to eliminate all of these sprays by creating a self-sustaining ecosystem. God put this big fire in the sky that provides lots of energy, and if we use it properly, and if we use the relationships between different plants and animals properly, we can create something that functions as close to as intended as possible. So let's take a quick peek at this little example here. This one's an Asian pear tree. It's going to produce some fruit. It's going to provide some shade for some of the plants underneath that can't handle quite as much sun. As we go down, we take a peek at this one. Looks like it is a uh, garlic chive, although the flower looks more like a regular chive. And this is a AI image that I generated, and it's not perfect, but it allows me to explain this. And what this one is going to do is it's going to have just enough scent that it confuses some of the pests, so they don't find that first tree, whether it's an apple tree or an Asian pear tree. And then we go down a little bit further here. And we take a look, and this is supposed to be a calendula, but it's something to attract pollinators. I'm a beekeeper, and I know it's getting harder and harder to keep bees alive every year. But if we attract native pollinators and we make sure something's always in bloom, then they will always be there for us. And then they'll be able to make sure that we are pollinated without needing to bring in bees. And then we go down a little bit further and we've got ground cover. This is supposed to be rhubarb and strawberries, so you can make a great pie. But in addition to making a great pie, these are shading the ground, which is preventing it from getting hot and from all the moisture evaporating, which means you don't have to water as much. But it's also shading the ground in a way that limits how many weeds come up. Rhubarb is great at keeping weeds down. I planted over 100 of them in my backyard to stop weeds from getting into my garden, and it was one of the best decisions I made. But these are going to reduce your maintenance a bunch. We come over here and we've got this is supposed to be a gummy berry, and it's doing nitrogen fixing. It's actually adding nitrogen, one of the main fertilizers that we apply to our soils, into the soil to improve our soil health. And then we come up and we're supporting predators like birds by having these plants or having these birdhouses around, and they're going to feed on some of our pests. So now we don't need to spray pesticides because we are confusing the pests and we're getting something to eat them. We don't need to do herbicides because we have filled the space and in a way that there isn't room for weeds. And then we don't need to fertilize because we have plants that are working together to do that fertilizing for us. When we combine these together, we create that functional ecosystem. It doesn't need heavy maintenance. And we do this by working with creation, not against it. This system is the closest that I can come up with to what the Garden of Eden would be. We had the fall, which means that we've got thorns and weeds and hard work. But as humans, we've then taken that problem, that curse, and we've taken it so much further, made it so much worse for ourselves by trying to grow food the way that we do, by concentrating on lots of one thing in one place. We're getting more disease, we're getting more waste, we're getting more problems. So I spent a lot of time in nature, and some of it has been altered by humans more than others. But as I look at it, I see patterns arise. And some are good, some not so much. But both of those teach how we can build something that is healthy without excessive suffering and disease and hardship. It's something with as much balance as is possible in a fallen world. In healthy areas, there are many different types of things growing, many types of plants and animals. No one is spraying biocides, the all-encompassing word. It means life killing, essentially, for pesticides and herbicides and all the things that are killing the life that we consider problems. Uh, and weeds aren't really an issue. And no one's watering nature every week. I mean, God is, but you don't have to have volunteers or pay people to do it. So you don't need to nerd out on nature as much as I have, but it's good to take a look at the wonders of creation to appreciate both God's handiwork and that we are making things harder than they need to be by the way that we are growing food. So we'll go into this a little bit deeper later, but whatever we build, let's also aim to follow God's plan, not just for creation care by mimicking creation, by copying and seeing what it was, how we designed this all to work, but also what his plan is for our church. So with that, we want to ensure that it is aligned with your church's values and with the mission that God has charged your church with. So I believe that every church and that every person in every church is called to both care for creation and to love your neighbor, which includes feeding the hungry. But your church can have some specific expressions of these callings, and your orchard should enhance your mission in as many ways as possible. You could have an orchard over here and a playground over there because you have this kids ministry that you do. But what if the playground was in the orchard and the paths of the orchard are curved to encourage kids to run and to play and to explore, and the kids will pick some food, ensuring that none goes to waste. And parents and kids alike can switch at some point from playing to harvesting, or parents can be harvesting some fruit, picking some fruit for the next week while keeping an eye on their children. Or maybe have an orchard over here and an outdoor venue for events over there. But why not have the outdoor venue surrounded by an orchard or by edible landscaping? This is providing year round beauty, while your venue provides a central location for things during, say, live music during a harvest days, which is a ministry opportunity where you have the community come out and harvest and listen to your worship team or some a local band or worship band playing music. So in permaculture design, which is a design science that I first studied, we call this stacking functions, which is making sure that every feature does more than one thing. How can you combine those elements to make the most of it? So nearly 2 years ago, my church approached me with an opportunity. My church had many acres of land, and they were looking for the ways to use it best. They had buildings, they had a prayer garden, which was a really large project that was donated to the church. They had forest, and this is what most of the land is, but it's going to take a lot of work to make that really useful. And then they had parking lots, a lot of parking lots to the tune of 4 acres. So this last category what was presented to me. The space was essential when we did Easter plays, in which case we would fill these parking lots over and over again in the week leading up to Easter. But those volunteers left, the ones who were running this event that took an entire year to plan, and that ministry stopped because no one else stepped up. No one else could commit the entire year to making sure it happened. So on an average Sunday, we can fill maybe 2.5 or 3 acres, but we had way more parking lot than we need. So let's take a look at this opportunity. This my lead pastor, Jason, asked if Sea Road Church and Eden's Refuge, my business, could partner to do something with that space. They would give me a free lease of the land, so long as what I did aligned with the church's mission. So I took this opportunity and I ran with it. The land was absolutely terrible. It was a gravel parking lot full of weeds on top of bedrock, not any soil to be found. But when the Lord provides, I will find a way to use it to the best of my ability. I will select plants, I will find the resources, I will put them together to make something work. So I'm going to press play on a quick little video here and show you tell you a little bit about this existing project, and then we'll have a little Q&A. And the video isn't there, but there we go. Get this working. Play. There's sound on that. So I started by contracting excavation companies and getting quotes to remove the gravel. And one quote stood out. It was a $3,500 quote, but they offered to donate their services in exchange for a donation receipt of the same amount. So I reached out to the church's finance person with a suggestion that another pastor, thank you, Pastor Kirk, gave to me. Uh, he had shared that in-kind donations can be a little bit messy, but what isn't messy is a purchase and a cash donation. So Jack Van Dusen Excavation removed the gravel, invoiced the church, who paid the invoice, and then Jack then donated the same amount back to the church. A really clean transaction with zero cost to the church, thanks to this local business who is supporting our mission. Now, we have this big hole in the ground where a parking lot used to be. So we put a row of pylons there to make sure that none of our congregation members, who most of them have no idea what was going on here, so that none of them drove into this new hole because that's where they're used to parking. And then we struck a deal with a local arborist who had so many wood chips. He sells the wood chips and donates the money to give kids in South America access to dental care. So I couldn't really talk him down on the price too much. So at this point, because I was funding a lot of this out of my own pocket, I searched for local business sponsors. And a local realtor, Jason McDonald, donated $1,000. I sold a bunch of plants, trees that I had grafted, and that added to the funds. And then we had enough money to buy the wood chips, but we still needed a way to transport about 300 cubic yards of wood chips into that big empty space. You can see how lovely it looked there. There's little scrapings of soil in some spots, but large sections, especially at the other end, were just straight rock. This is when a member of our congregation reached out to his employer and asked for a favor. He borrowed their triaxle dump truck to deliver 15 loads of wood chips into what looks now a lot less like a parking lot. And this is a hot, steaming pile of wood chips. It was well below zero at the time. They were just breaking down really nicely. So I used a pitchfork to spread the first 100 yards or so as they came in. But I had to get to work and I left. And the idea of spreading the rest was just too intimidating. Uh, so the same congregation member borrowed a loader and spread it for me. Some manure was purchased. Another couple loads of mulch were delivered by another congregation member, George, who was new to the church and was looking for a place to belong and to engage. So I spent a few days shoveling out pathways in the orchard, which is what's happening in this video right now. I'm pulling it with my cart, acting like an ox, and just working my butt off, and making sure that all of the wood chips were in the growing beds because I didn't need them in the pathways. I needed as much material to grow in as possible because this was bootstrap project, as cheap as I could, and I didn't have any money for extra material, so I was moving that. And then a donation from a local ethical clothing company, Nature's Hum, helped to cover the cost of many of the shrubs and some of the trees that we installed because my own nursery was not yet big enough for a project on this scale. So I sold a lot of the trees that I did have because I had a lot of the same types of trees. And then I was able to add more money to buy some of the trees and shrubs that I didn't have. And then another local business, Trinity Timber Framing, helped move a big old empty shed from the woods at the church over here and let me use his truck and his trailer to pick up some IBC totes to store water for watering this. And the rest of the work was primarily done by hand because I am not great at asking for help uh, and didn't want to spend the money to rent equipment. So fortunately, my wife is crazy and is totally happy with me pouring into something like this. And um, so you can see here, this is me getting ready for the plant set, but this back portion here is the nursery, the back kind of square. And I took cuttings from some of the shrubs as I was planting them to multiply them. They grow roots, and then I can plant more. And then I planted some of the other ones where I buried a branch where it went underground and back up, and it would grow roots underground. I could cut that off, and I could have more plants. So I can continue to fill this out and expand. This spring, I added a bunch more trees into the nursery here, where the kids are planting some of the seedling trees. And there are about 400 fruit trees in there now, and many more vines and shrubs as well. So this is this exciting thing where tomorrow I'll be able to finish a meeting up with a Trinity Timber Frames again, who's going to help move some of the last material so I can plant some of the rest of this out. Uh, just taking a peek at my notes here. So at this point, I could walk away for 10 years and it would continue to produce food. It is not dependent on me. It will do better if I'm here to help it grow, to help it do the most that it can. But it doesn't need me anymore because it's already an ecosystem, which is great. So over the past year, kids have run on the paths with their dads. They've planted their first flowers. They've eaten their first currants and gooseberries, discovering new healthy foods right on the plant with the small harvest from the first year. Now, I enjoyed a lot of the grapes and raspberries and Hass-caps between wheelbarrow loads, and I felt like that was kind of well earned. But this year we'll have more raspberries, grapes, currants, gooseberries, Hass-caps, and elderberries. We'll also have our first apples, plums, and cherries. We've already harvested culinary mushrooms this spring as well, and these mushrooms are in all of the wood chips. So we inoculated in there to break the wood chips down into soil, and then which super cool that nature works this well. And we also planted some potatoes and other annual foods between the trees to take advantage of that space that the trees haven't occupied yet. So once this project is mature, this orchard will provide up to 10,000 pounds of food each year, plus enough materials to grow hundreds more plants for future projects. So so how cool is it that 1 year after being a parking lot, it's already producing food? It's already connecting people and businesses with the churches. And the ministry has already begun, even though I'm not done installing this project yet. I'm doing this one in between working on projects for clients and designing projects for other churches. The personal project tends to get put behind. So let's do a little bit of a question and answer period here. See if you have any questions here before we really start to dive in deep to how this works from beginning to end. Welcome back. So let's get started with your journey towards starting your own orchard ministry. So I could start by talking about what trees are best, or by recommending some specific templates that you can apply and follow, but that's not going to serve your ministry best. Every church is different. We are called to love our neighbors and tend to creation, but how we do that varies greatly. Just as you may preach differently to your congregation than you would to your youth group, or while talking about the same message on the 5 p.m. news, your orchard will be designed differently to serve different missions. So our layout can communicate anything from highly productive space to look how amazing God's creation is, to come sit down, stay a while, and pray, to come on, kids, run and play and eat, to getting married here is like getting married in the Garden of Eden, and it just feels right. So let's walk through some of the process of figuring out what your values are and what your resources are, and setting those goals and creating your design so that when we do get to the portion about actually planting your orchard, you know what you want to plant and where you want to plant it. So when I work with a private owner to a property owner to design their yard, I ask them this question about what 3 values apply to their design and to their life as a whole. What are their 3 biggest values? It's a big question. I then spend the next hour of the meeting asking other questions and seeing how they line back up to this first statement, or how they counter those. In my first book, Before the Design, I have a whole section on understanding your values so you can set your goals and design based off of those goals. With a church, it can be a bit trickier. Does your denomination have guiding values that you claim as your own? Does that actually align with what you're doing in practice? If not, are you going to change what you say you value, or are you going to change how you put those values into practice, because they can be at odds with each other? It, as you can tell, I don't really treat this phase lightly because it is that important. If you say you believe one thing, but you do something else, then there's a problem. So, do you need to change what you're saying you believe in because this is what you really believe in? This is your ministry. This is what you're focused on. This is what your values are. Or do you need to change what you're doing to make sure it aligns with what you have said are your values? If your church has its own values, are they clear enough that you can use them to plan your design? Or are they some vagary that sounded great in your boardroom when you were planning it with your elders, but doesn't mean anything at all to anyone who wasn't in the room when those values were laid out and they understood the context of what those clever wordings meant? Most written wordings for values are not clear enough to drive your mission forward, whether it's an orchard or your song selection or a sermon series. If you can't sum it up in a few words in a way that can guide your decisions, then you're not done defining your values. So my church has a tagline, not value, but a tagline that is that we are a group of people committed to living and loving like Jesus. This is an excellent tagline that can start to guide decisions, but it's not clear enough to drive you forward with a defined path. Living and loving like Jesus could mean anything from we wear sandals and go from town to town telling people that they're sinners and that they're forgiven. Or it could mean that we have a passion for the widows and the orphans, and we like to provide food for the hungry miraculously. Or it could mean that anyone can come to us and get healed. It could mean that we're either always serving or praying. All of these can be good, but it's not enough. This phrase isn't enough for our purposes. It doesn't tell us what shape our orchard needs to take. So this could be a guiding statement for your values and your mission. When my pastor offered me the parking lot, it was because he looked at our land and realized that the extra parking space isn't helping the church to live and love like Jesus. And how could that space help the church align with that overarching mission? It could house the homeless. It could be rented out as storage so that the money could be used to serve people. Let people park their boats here and pay a fee that we can send along to the food bank, whatever that looked like. Our pastor knows that our church values feeding the hungry. So he combined this value with the revelation that the land isn't serving the mission to come up with a solution. When I started designing the orchard, I then recognized that our church puts a great value on kids ministry. And as a new dad and former youth leader, so do I. I put a great value on that. So with this in mind, I combined the values of feeding the hungry and living and loving like Jesus with the value of kid ministry. So I designed the orchard in a way that will attract kids to run through it. And I included many small fruits that are really easy for them to pick and eat when they visit. With these values, if I see a kid walking out of that orchard tired with their dad huffing and puffing behind them, and the kid has their fingers and their lips are stained purple because they've been eating berries, I know that's a signal to celebrate because that means that it is doing what I intended. Now, if the values were we want all the food to go to the food bank, and I see someone coming out with with fingers that are stained because I designed a path that it's fun to run through, and I encouraged kids to go there, and now they're picking it all. Well, that might be a problem because it's not aligning with the main value. So, how do you find your values? I'll be honest, I'm hoping to get feedback on this because I'm still refining what to put in this chapter of my book. The easiest scenario is that you look at your existing value statements, you pray on them, you confirm that this is what you are going to stick with. Or you may meet with your church's leadership to pray and discuss options. Or you may spend time with your entire congregation. Or you may put a box at the entrance of your sanctuary and a bunch of paper where people can write what they believe the values for the church should be and or what they believe what they see based off of what you guys are doing. And this can reveal a lot about your congregation and about your church. However you do it, make sure you do it and that you continue refining it over time. So please do let me know if you have any exercises that may help this process so that I can share them with others. In the meantime, let's take take a look at some generic values and how they could define your project. So one is kids. If you have a playground in your space, then that's going to draw the kids there. If you have space for kids to run around, if you design it around your field because you still need space for your kids to play, but you design the trees you're going to go with some bigger trees that will provide shade for the parents so they have a shady spot to sit. How you can design it in a space where families can really fit and belong. Or maybe you're doing something hosting events. Now, this example here is very full, but if you had a stage in there where people can play music and where all these people are sitting on stones, if those were planter boxes that are all a nice height for sitting on the edge of, then you can combine. Sorry, my camera just timed out there. You can combine growing space with sitting space, or you can have a space where people want to get married, or where you're having cookouts uh, and serving food after a service. Maybe your thing is about prayer walks, in which case you want to have have a curved spot where it curves enough that people can feel like they're in a private spot, or where there are little nooks and crannies where people can spend time privately and praying. And maybe there are little stands with prompts that you can change out depending on the season for prayer and for contemplation. Or maybe you want to support a specific organization or ministry. If you want to support a specific ministry, then you're going to plant what they need. You're going to make sure that if it's, say, feeding schools, you want to make sure that your food ripens during the school year, and maybe that you have some apples and pears and other things that store for a long time so that you can get it to the schools when they need it. Maybe even invest in some freeze dryers to freeze dry some of those fresh berries so that they can have that like a candy treat almost all the way through the winter. Now now that we know your values, let's take a look at the resources that you have available. Now, those are just some quick examples of values because values go so deep and there are so many varied options, and I'm trying to blow through this information way too quickly. Uh, so the resource that you have available isn't just money. The fact that you were here for a free webinar shows that there are other resources that you can take into account. So I like to divide the resources into 8 forms of capital. Let's run through those before setting goals for your orchard. The first off is financial. Some of my fancy pictures stopped at this point. A lot of them got cleared out, but the important stuff is here. So, do you have savings as a church? Do you have access to grants? Do you have a congregation that supports a new project that you can do a special offering they will do? What actual financial resources do you have that you can allocate towards this? We'll talk a little bit later about some of the fundraising options and financial sources. But let's take a look at some of the other ones. We have social capital. If your church is very active in the community, if you're volunteering, if you're serving a lot, then you have likely earned some social capital, and you'll have people like the Van Duzens who are willing to support what you're doing and to come in and offer their services. They might show up with a tractor. Maybe a local nursery will donate some of the plants. Whatever that is, you can trade some of your social capital. You can call in a favor. So think about who in your community might be willing to offer social capital a favor. Maybe the social capital is from a local building supply company and they're willing to give you material capital. And if you just finished a construction project, our church put on an addition 15 years ago or something, and there are still bits of siding in some places, and we could use that to build a shed. Or there might be additional paving stones or something that you can use to put in a little bit of a walkway or a base for a bench. What materials do you have that could benefit your new ministry? This is especially important if those materials are sitting in a place where they're a problem. If they're just a pile of garbage right now, think about them. Don't dismiss them because they're garbage. See if any of those resources, any of those problems could become a solution for something else. And then we got living capital. What living things do you have? The trees, the plants, the mulch. But then what living things does your congregation have? Do you have some people in your congregation who love growing food and who have fruit bushes? A lot of fruit bushes, if you take a cutting from it at the right time of year and you push it into the ground, it will grow roots and become a new bush, which means that you can set up you can cut the cost of your project drastically by leaning in on that living capital. Or intellectual capital. What skills and knowledge not just do you have, but does your congregation have? What do they love to research? Someone in your congregation might be an accountant, but might be a gardener on the weekend. Or someone might know a lot about laying stones or about putting up fences. Whatever that is, look for what all that intellectual capital is within your congregation and see how you can put it to use. Maybe you have someone who knows a lot about grant writing, in which case that is a great resource, and you may be able to qualify for a lot of funding to make a lot of things happen easily. Or it could be experiential. Now, this is a bit of a trickier. What places or situations have you experienced that can help shape this project? Is there an orchard or a project or somewhere where you've been once upon a time that will shape this? Is there a place that it felt just right, or that you saw some things growing together that it worked really well, that you can kind of replicate that in your space? What are those experiences? Then time is a big one. How much time do you have? How much time does your congregation or your employees have? How much time? Ooh, there's a typo on this. How much time can they actually spare? Time is a big one, and time can overcome a lot of things Uh, you can trade the other ones for time. You can trade financial capital to get my time to help you install, in which case you're getting my intellectual capital, my experiential capital. Uh, but how much time do you really have to commit, both immediately and ongoing? And then the final one is one that when I talk to non church groups, it's a bit of a weird one to explain, but spiritual capital. And I can't say it better than I wrote it down here, which is if God is calling you to do this, pray, seek his guidance and his provision, because this is a far greater asset than anything else that we've listed here. And now, this is actually one last section before we can set into your goals. And this is a really quick one. Uh, is what are your strengths and weaknesses? I hope that you're see the value of this stuff. I hope that you have seen some extra resources you hadn't thought of. I hope that you've thought about your values already a little bit and a light bulb has gone off where you realize, yes, we can use some edible landscaping to enhance this other mission that we're doing. This before the design work is so important that I wrote an entire book on the topic to give to my design clients to walk through before working with me if they want to get the best design for them and their property. So strengths and weaknesses can be a really big factor when starting a ministry. If your church is great at raising money, but has really high volunteer turnover, then and maybe that volunteer turnover is a good thing. Maybe it's because you're equipping people to go off into ministry elsewhere and you're a church that's sending people all the time. That's great. But you should consider spending a little bit more money up front to reduce the maintenance and to set up smooth running systems that are easy to train people on because you're going to be training new people all the time. And even if it's just as simple as you take the stuff from here and you set it in this box and then you stack them in this spot, you still have to tell someone to do that. You still have to tell them where it goes. If you have great, consistent volunteers but not much money, consider if one of your volunteers may want to undertake starting a small plant nursery at the church where you could buy 10 fruit bushes of a few different types, and then they can turn that into 1,000 of them over a handful of years by taking cuttings over time, by using simple cloning methods like that layering where I mentioned, where you bury part of the branch and the part that's underground grows roots, and then you can cut it off and plant it elsewhere. If you have excellent community connections, but a small congregation, how can you work with the community to overcome your lack of members and your lack of volunteer? If you don't have great community connections or for volunteers or for distributing the food, but you have a really strong online presence, can you use that online presence to talk about this new mission and this to make new community connections? So if you look at your resources, if you did a good job of listing your resources, you can find some strengths and weaknesses in there and you can look at how you can use those to balance each other, how you can strengthen your weakest points to find the opportunities to make the most of what you do have. Now it's time to actually set your goals. I could go into detail about this, but goal setting is widely talked about. So set SMART goals. You've probably heard this before. SMART goals are specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, and they're time sensitive. So really just look online. You can look in my book, whatever it is. I dive into a lot more detail in it in my book. Uh, So instead of saying we want to grow more food, your goal might be we will grow 1,000 pounds of fresh fruits each year in our front garden and hand deliver it to homeless people in our community. And our first delivery will be this fall, but we will reach 1,000 pounds per year starting in 2028. Or instead of we want to feed students, you may say we will grow 30,000 pounds of food each year and will partner with a local moving company to have them deliver the fresh food to local schools weekly. We will focus on harvest in the fall and spring, and we'll set up a walk in fridge to store the harvest to ensure consistent deliveries throughout the school year. We'll install our orchard spring 2027, and we'll start delivering food in at whatever time. Your goals might also include something about supporting native pollinators or creating a space with X feeling, or supporting Y mission, or creating Z number of jobs for people who are unemployable. Or it may even be something like the landscape will lead people's eyes as they look at the landscape up to the cross on the building, or towards a certain stained glass, or something else where one of the goals is really to draw the eye to a certain spot. Once you have your goals that are defined by your values, because if your goals don't line up with your values, they don't matter. They, it is worthless to set goals if they don't line up with your values, because it's not working towards what is important. It's not working towards what God has commissioned you to do. So it's defined by those values, those resources, those strengths, and those weaknesses. It's now time to look at the landscape design styles. But first, time for some questions. What questions do you have? Welcome back. So now you have your values, your resources, your strengths, your weaknesses, and your goals, which are defined by all of the above. Let's look at designing your orchard or edible landscape. So again, an edible landscape is just landscaping, creating something beautiful that is also producing food. I love a good hedge for privacy, but if that hedge can also make me haskellapes that are so delicious, or hazelnuts that are delicious and healthy and full of good fats and proteins, and also are excellent when mixed with chocolate and sugar to make Nutella, uh, whatever that is, I prefer if it is functional. So this is what edible landscaping is. And when I mention an orchard, most people think of straight rows with one type of trees with nothing but grass between them. So this style of orchard, I did touch on this briefly, but we're going to go into a little bit more depth here, is possible only because of our cheap access to fertilizers and biocides, which again is that stuff that kills anything that is alive that we don't want to be alive. There are organic options for sprays and fertilizers, but if you remember the little preview of the ecosystem that we wanted to create, it looks like something different. This and then this system can be designed in any shape or style that you want. You can you can have, you know, your bushes in a row in front with some trees behind. You can have a tree with some smaller trees beside it, and some nice anchor plants down in front. You can you can have a curved path that goes to an archway. You can arrange it however you want. If your church needs to keep a clean, manicured look because of bylaws, you can do that while generating huge yields. If you want to create a forest that feels so natural that your plan to create a retreat center with campsites will fit right in, you can do that, creating an entire forest, including large canopy trees that feels natural, that houses campsites, that houses whatever it is that you have. Uh, so we're going to look at some landscape design styles, and this is a surface view just to kind of spark your imagination. Uh, but think about what design styles will best enhance the values that you have for your church. Then we'll go into a little bit deeper into that ecosystem design, and then I'll look at a few mock-ups that I made for a church who's currently installing their gardens. If I can find my next button, there it is. And my ear is itchy from being in these headphones. Sorry about that. So a formal garden is a statement. It can be peaceful for minds that need organization and symmetry and clean lines, but this is usually something that is intended to be impressive, and it needs a lot of maintenance usually. As you can tell, looking at this picture, all the hedges are very neatly trimmed and pruned, and this is something that's going to look like you have uh, a full-time maintenance staff, because you may have a full-time maintenance staff to maintain something like this. You can do it with lower maintenance, but you're probably not going to have quite as nice square edges on your bushes. Then you go into the cottage garden. This is planted so densely that the weeds struggle to take hold. It usually has kind of winding footpaths, not usually thick enough for a wheelchair, but quite narrow little wandering paths, sometimes stepping stones to get to certain places, and with clumps of different types of flowers. You can create the same feel, especially if you focus more on shrubs rather than trees, and include some edible flowers. They have lots of nutrients, but they also have a bit of a wow factor when you have them in your salad or in a stir fry. Uh, and then this is also something that if you're doing a bigger project, you can have a little bit of this as, say, if your orchard is, I can see if you see me on the top screen here, from here over here, if this is your main orchard, and then you have a little bit of edible landscaping over here before your path wherever people are entering from, then that can be a good spot for it in that narrow strip. Or you can go to a modern or contemporary landscape. It's usually pretty minimalistic. It's likely has raised beds and straight lines and is focused not so much on the color of the plants that are in it, but on the shape of the plants, on the structure of the plants. And uh, it is less likely to get huge yields, but you can still get some good yields while enhancing whatever your mission is if it aligns with this landscape style, or if you need to have that kind of modern landscape style near the front of your building because it's a modern building and it just kind of demands this landscape style, you can do that and make it work and still do something different on a different part of your property if that works there as well. And then native gardens are getting a lot more popular. Whether you're planting an entirely native space or not, you can include pockets with this kind of native wildflower area look or choose plants that will create this feel. I find that this is a style that is best used very intentionally, uh, especially in smaller pockets or with defined borders. Something that makes it look like this is on purpose because it's really easy for a native garden to become something that by law shows up because it looks like you just aren't mowing your lawn. So you have to be really intentional when you're doing this, and sometimes having a sign can help. But you can grow a fair bit of food while keeping a native landscape look. Uh, it will change some of what you're growing, but you can still do quite a bit. And then the food forest or forest garden is kind of a taller version of that natural space. In this case, you create the entire forest with trees and shrubs and winding paths. It'd be a great option if you're looking to add some campsites to a bigger property because you can include anything from a tiny strawberry plant to the 5 foot tall haskaps to the 6 to 10 foot tall elderberries or ronia berries or hazelnuts to fruit trees that are anywhere from 8 to 30 feet tall, or there are a few that are even taller, like those seedlings that my kids were planting in that video. They are American persimmon. I think, if I recall correctly, they either grow like 60 or 80 feet high. They grow quite tall. Uh, but then there are also nut trees that can grow to 100 feet tall and can produce food for hundreds of years. So by mixing and matching the plants at different locations, structuring them, you can create something that feels the way that a good forest should while producing massive amounts of food. And then straight row orchards are also possible, and uh, they can make large projects more manageable because you can have rows with specific numbers. So in row 1 through 12, you can have things that only ripen in, say, early August, and then rows 13 through 17 ripen in mid August, and then rows 18 through 23 ripen in late August, and so on and so forth, all the way through to November or whenever your season ends. So in this layout, we're still creating our full ecosystem, but we lay out in organized rows. This is an ecologically friendly version of a traditional orchard. And when designed correctly, it does not require sprays or fertilizers, just like all of the other landscape design styles here. So you can see in the image, there are trees, there are fruit bushes and flowers underneath. In this case, there's some mulch and then a mowable pathway. But we'll talk about some of the options both for mulch and for your pathways later. So this option is great if you have a field to turn into an orchard and the only use for it is to be a productive space. No prayer walks, no integrated playgrounds, just productive rows in a space in a way that respects creation, a way that improves the soil. You can do this on something that starts with pure sand or pure clay. Uh, Both of them will take a little bit of work and will slowly build up a nice soil over time. And then a final landscape style is for you, those of you with very little property, you can work with small footprints by growing vertically, whether it's an herb tower like the one down here, this way. Everything is mirrored on my screen. Uh, or uh, if you're using carefully managed espalier trees, which are those trees, if you've ever seen them, where they'll have a branch that grows up and all the branches go straight sideways. There's none going forward or backward, they go sideways, and you can form a fence. It kind of looks similar from a distance to a vineyard with grapevines that are growing on these straight rows. And this can allow you to get a good, really good amount of production out of a tiny space. If you had a strip along the edge that's only a few feet wide, you can grow one of these every 5 or 10 feet, depending on the size of the tree, and be able to grow hundreds of pounds or thousands of pounds of food on your border. So even in a really small space, you can find out ways to grow vertically in that small space. Let's go. We're going to go a little bit more to these ecosystem components, but I'm not going to go too long because I am running low on time here. So, and as I already talked about some of these fruit production, uh, and actually because I'm running low on time, I probably will give over revisiting this portion. Uh, but one of the main things is you're going to look at all these different elements and you're going to just make sure they're in there. Just get a checklist. Find the plants that will work well on your property. It may be that you have shrubs or bushes that are currants or gooseberries or something like that because they grow really well in your area, or raspberries. They grow really well in your area. Look at what's growing wild. If it grows wild on your property, if it grows like a weed and produces food, then it's probably what you want to grow because that's what naturally wants to grow in your space. Uh, but just kind of get your list and find these are the shrubs that we want, these are the flowers that we want, these are the nitrogen fixers that we want. And then for every tree, make sure there are, you know, 3 to 6 bushes, and that there's an herb or flower at least every foot throughout the entire space. And you'll just fill in that space. What happens by just checking these boxes over and over and over again is that you end up with, oh, there we go. You end up with something that becomes a whole self-sustaining ecosystem. It is really simple. It's also really complex, but it can be really simple if you just kind of check those boxes. And I'm here if you have questions on any of this, if you're looking to figure out what to grow. I'm also available, little self plug. I'm also available to design these projects for you. That is something that I do. Speaking of that, that was an unintended transition. Here are 3 mock-ups that I did, so not full designs, just general concepts that I did for the same property based on 3 different values that they had described. Now these were extreme separate examples so that they could take what they liked from each one and I could combine them into their final design. So the first one was security. In the forest behind their property, there was a lot of homeless people moving in, and they wanted to take care of the homeless people, but they were leaving needles all over the place, and it was putting their congregation at risk. It was putting the kids at risk who played. So in this case, they wanted their property is at the kind of the bottom, or their offices are kind of at the bottom of this property. So they wanted the sight lines all the way through, in this case, to the forest to be able to see what was going on there. So this one was the straight lines were not because of efficient harvest, but were actually because of that security of being able to see what's going on. This other one was prayer and connection with nature. This is winding pathways. They decided that they were going to put up a greenhouse because they had some other plans and values that went along with that. So I tossed a greenhouse in there. But this is winding pathways, and there are actually, you can't see them in there because they're tucked in so well, but there are pockets in there that are private and that are big enough to have a bench to sit a few people. And there are, I believe, 13 of them hidden throughout here. And they just blend in so well. They hide so well, even in the drawing, which means that you know that when you're in there, it's going to feel private. You're going to have that great opportunity just to be just to be present, just to be reflecting with God. And the last one was this opportunity they wanted to proclaim hope. So this one from the satellite view, you can see on the left hand side there, from the satellite view from a fairly high height, people were going to see the three crosses, and it was I'll be honest, I was kind of grasping at straws, trying to figure out how can we proclaim hope from a distance. So this one became a little bit more, if you look at the right-hand picture, a little bit more of a formal landscape. There are there are bushes that can be pruned heavily. There are in to create those crosses. One of the crosses is a vineyard of grapes, and it just kind of created that view from above. And these were three examples of using kind of a single value as the main driving force. I went fairly extreme on these ones, uh, but it shows how the same space, all three of these are actually going to produce fairly similar amounts of food. Actually, in this case, the this one here was going to produce the least because the just because of the dimensions of the space, we could get more trees in with either of these other two options and more bushes in than we could in that first option. And you can do this on really big spaces, which is great. When you have acres of land, a community orchard can yield anywhere from 10,000 to millions of pounds of food every year. You can grow a lot of food, and it's wonderful. Uh, but also in a small space, you have to get really intentional, and you can still grow a massive amount of food in a really little space. Uh, my home property here is a 0.17 of an acre, and it has a big duplex on it, so it's quite a small property. We've got 30 fruit trees here. Now, a fruit tree, most of these are dwarf to semi-dwarf, which means they're producing anywhere from 100 to 400 pounds of food a year each. So when you do that math, you realize there's a lot of food happening on this really small space, and we still have room for a big trampoline. We still have room for a fire pit. We still have room for the rabbit hutches that get moved around all the time so the rabbits have a good quality of life. There's still room for a deck for the back apartment and a deck for my apartment. You can squeeze a lot into a small space if you're very intentional about it. But when in doubt, plant your things just a little bit further apart. Well, now that you know your style and you know the basics of creating an ecosystem, you have the basics of what you need to be able to design something that's beautiful and functional. Look at your values, set your goals, pick a landscape design style that works with those goals, and kind of map something out, and then plunk things in that create the ecosystem. Make sure all those functions are in there. That's that's basically it. That's my job, just oversimplified. Now, we're going to look at fundings and tips for keeping maintenance work down and actually planting your orchard. And takes a lot of time to get to this point. And this is what many people would consider the starting point is you buy a bunch of trees and you put them in the ground. But you'll be much better off because you're taking the time to plan properly. So a new ministry like this costs money, so you'll need to fund it somehow, which is a really great time to talk about the actual financial costs of something like this. Your project could cost anywhere from $100 to a multi-million-dollar project. This depends on how big it is and how fancy you get. You might spend $1,000 on plants and $10,000 on a state-of-the-art irrigation system, $100,000 on fancy interlocking stone to connect it all, and then $1 million for a high-tech outdoor stage with the latest sound equipment. It all depends on your goals and how smart you are about your project and about using your resources. But here are some rough numbers for kind of averaging out for a few church projects that I designed, and they all produce around 10,000 pounds of food per year. So the cost for plants was about $6,000. Irrigation is up to $2,500. Site prep, which whether it's excavation or removing soil or doing a little bit of changing to the slopes to deal with flooding issues, another $2,500. Installation, which ideally is mostly volunteer labor with a few paid workers, is $4,000 or so. And then professional design, which includes your soil testing, creating your plant list recommendations, working through all your values, all of that is, say, $3,000. So You may also need fencing or to bring in some soil, or you may choose to add lighting or buy a shed, and those will add to the cost. And in general, a project that is smaller is going to cost more per pound of production than one that is bigger, because that design cost gets spread out. If the equipment's already there to do some work, it doesn't take much more to do twice as much work as it does to show up and do a small task. But in general, the cost works out to about $1 to $3 per pound of annual production, meaning if you pay $1 to $3, if you pay $100 to $300, you're growing 100 to 300 pounds of food each year. And with a system like this, easily producing food for 50 plus years, replacing the occasional plant along the way, the cost per pound of food is 3 to 6 cents per pound. Uh, and again, that cost goes down to the lower end as you go bigger and as you keep it simple by removing features like irrigation. But irrigation is one that I like to try and include for people because it cuts down the labor immensely. It takes hours to water an orchard by hand with a hose. So the example that I just mentioned with those pricings, assuming that it never reaches maximum production, that it only ever reaches 80% of its maximum yields, that works out to 5.5 cents per pound. Now, 5.5 cents per pound is amazing for organic apples and berries and Asian pears and herbs and plums and grapes and kiwis and hazelnuts. But imagine after another 40 or 50 years of inflation, that becomes a transformative change in your community. But how can we get these costs down? How can we fund this project? In that example, we already used some volunteer labor, and we assumed that you already had fences and that you could get some free wood mulch. Uh, but we can bring that out of pocket cost down even further. Option one, look for grants. There are many grants for food security projects, for eco-friendly projects, for community gardens, for similar projects. Dive deep into those, look for strange wordings, look for the ones that people aren't normally going for. But don't forget about your denomination. Many denominations have grants that churches can apply for, which can subsidize this cost. And it is possible to 100% fund a project with grants, although that is not common. Uh, so other options are commercial sponsorships. So I told people that businesses that if you donate $100 or $1,000 towards the project, that we'll stick a small plaque up with your business name. Uh, and I stuck a little thing on my website with hey, these are the sponsors. It's on there as well. You can do fundraisers, plant sales, bake sales are, I feel like the profit margins on it are are very low. That generally, if the people that spent all their time baking went and worked doing, some yard work or anything in their skill set, they could earn a lot more money in that same amount of time for most people than they would making that food and then trying to sell it. But you can also you can do a fundraiser by doing a workshop or by having a speaking event. Have someone like myself or a local expert come and speak on a topic and teach a workshop that you charge admission for, or that you give donations to your project, or trade other forms of capital. My church traded its land to me, uh, now to get an entire orchard. Now that only works because I only needed one demonstration site, but it is a great example of they just traded access to this land for it. And this land was a surplus. It was a burden because they were having to pay to maintain it. Now, you want to plan for low maintenance. The edge is where most of the maintenance happens. Uh, if you if you think of a big lawn, you can mow the middle of the lawn. When you get near the fence, when you get near the sidewalks, that's where you end up doing the whippersnippering and a lot of work. So if you plan your edge properly, you can reduce a lot of your maintenance burden. Something like, say, a whole bunch of rhubarb as the edge. Now you get this solid line of rhubarb, and let's say it's coming down, like your leaves are coming down here. You can run your lawnmower right over the edge of those last leaves, and you're not going to harm the plant at all, but you're going to be able to mow right up onto the edge of your garden. Or if you have mulch and you design it in a way that you can drive your lawnmower right up on the edge. Uh, or if you're doing an interlock stone and you make sure that you plan for the transition between your interlock and your gardens, because that is where most of your work is going to come from. Look around your property now. Look and see where are those parts where you can change something at an edge to reduce your maintenance, to reduce your maintenance costs, or to free up volunteer time so that you can do better work. You can also do a lot of mulch. Mulch helps a lot. It covers the ground, it keeps weeds down. There are two main options. One is wood chips. They can be freely available in a lot of areas, and it's a great option. It's going to keep building your soil over time, but it does take some volunteer labor every single year as you reapply it. The other option is more controversial, a heavy duty UV stable plastic. Now, this is a sheet plastic that you put holes in where your trees go and where your bushes go, and it will pretty well stop all your weeds. If you end up with a hole in it where a weed comes through, you pull the weed out and you stick another plant that's going to grow food. If you pick the right one, it will last the entire life of your orchard. And at the end of your orchard, it's not going to be falling apart. It's going to still be intact. So it's not releasing microplastics everywhere. It is a tricky one for creation care because you are using plastics, but you're also doing a lot to benefit the ecosystem at the same time. I think the benefits are going to outweigh the drawbacks if it is a big enough project, and by doing plastic, it's going to enable you to actually do this work. So it is a tricky one. It is a question. If you are doing plastic mulch, make sure you have your irrigation installed underneath it. And irrigation is another big one for maintenance. The difference between either going out and standing and watering each plant, which can take so many hours. A small tree that's just a little stick that's only here, that's, the roots are only this big. On a good hot day, I'm probably watering 30 plus seconds per tree, per bush, per flower. I'm watering, at least 10 seconds to make sure it gets down. And with thousands of plants, it can take you the better part of a day to water it. But if you have a drip irrigation system, you can turn a valve, or even better, it's automated and it will just automatically turn on, and you don't have to worry about it. You just have to make sure the water is available. Designed for low maintenance, it's going to make your maintenance burdens lower, which means your volunteers can spend time doing the best work, or your workers can spend time doing the most important work. And then you get ready to plant. So when you're planting, uh, for bare root trees, which is the cheapest way to buy trees and one of the best ways, they come with no soil on them. That is in the spring. It's pretty much the only time that most people ship them. Potted trees are ideally planted in the fall. I won't get into the details of why, although they're typically only available in the spring because that's when people want to plant. So you're probably going to end up planting in the spring. Ideally, plan ahead and order from reputable online nurseries because you can save a lot of money that way, and you can also get some of the most disease-resistant plants that are going to do the best in your property. Uh, the types of apples that you get at the grocery store are designed for those systems, are grown in those systems that require sprays. If you try and grow those varieties, you will have to spray. You will have to fertilize, or maybe not fertilize because if you do the other portions, but you will have to spray and you will have to treat them regularly. But if you treat something that's more disease resistant, you can get a similar flavor and similar texture, but it's not as susceptible to those diseases. Then that's going to make a really big difference. And you can get those better from the online mail order locations. Then you're going to get the land ready. Does that mean removing trees? Does that mean removing some grass? In my case, removing gravel. Whatever you have to do to get ready. Ideally, anything with big machines is done before a crowd shows up to plant. And then mark your layout. Take your time. Mark where things are going to be, so that way you know where your paths are. You know where your trees are. And if you're going to do a plastic mulch, ideally put that in before volunteers arrive. So that way your volunteers can arrive and you can have your spots marked on your plastic of where everyone is going to, each tree is going to get planted, each bush is going to get planted. Even if you just have the trees, they can fill in the gaps with the bushes and they can kind of guess at that portion. But have some of this work done ahead of time and make sure you have all of your plants ready. Make sure that they're organized. Make sure that it is easy. And then when the actual planting day comes, friends like food. If you have people in your congregation that want to help out, but their bodies aren't able to do the physical work anymore, get them to make sandwiches, get them to make some soup, get them to make some nice some nice drinks for everybody, because that's going to make cheer people up. That's going to build community. It is good. Plants need water, but so do people. And have one person who has the plan that people can come to ask questions. And ideally, have a few other people who know specific things about specific parts. And then so that way you can kind of delegate, like, oh, that is a great problem for Larice. Larice can go and help with that. And then make it simple, whatever that looks like. That may mean that you start by having hey, here's how to plant a tree, and you teach people how to plant a tree properly. There you go. Uh, and you treat them, this is how the roots get spread out. This is how you shape your hole. This is how you cover your hole. Don't put fertilizers in your hole. Don't put manure in your hole. Put the same soil it's going to grow in, because that's going to help your tree grow the best. And then put any extra nutrients on top. We're gonna have a question and answer period, but I'm actually going to go right to the end. A few tips for cutting costs for future growth. If you plant a small number of bushes and shrubs, and then you start growing plants, it doesn't need to be a fancy thing like this. I don't even know what this picture is from. Uh, it was just in my presentation software. But you can clone your bushes. You can expand for free if you plan and do it properly. And let's take a peek at some of the ministry opportunities. The ministry opportunities are nearly limitless. Some of the ideas include using your orchard to give jobs for unemployable people. You can have planting days, harvesting days, prayer walks, music in the orchard, whether it's a worship night or just having speakers throughout that play music. You can have treasure hunts at Easter. You can have a U pick where the community can pick food to take home, as long as if they pick one basket to take home, they pick two baskets for you to give away, and this gets them involved in giving. So you can share the harvest, and this is the most obvious one, where you're giving food to where it's needed, and you can do this to schools, you can do this to homeless people, you can do this uh, with a free food stand out in front of your church. You can do this in your kitchen, whatever that looks like. You can do kitchen ministries. And this is a great opportunity where you can have an ongoing cooking class where you're going to use some of the ingredients from the orchard, from the gardens there, and you're going to get to build a relationship with people over time. A lot of churches have a certified kitchen, so this is a great opportunity for a lot of you to use that space and to build long-term relationships. And if your kitchen is certified and you do things right, then maybe you get them to do a bunch of something and they can take a bit home, but you also have something that you can then give. You can donate and share. Or education and hosting educational events, whether it's here's how to make more bushes, here's how to pick food, here is just here's just some of the food, and here's a taste tour, taste testing walk where we can come around and you can try some of these different fruits that grow really well here. And these can really empower church members and the community, and is a good faith in action demonstration. And you can also do have sermons and have teachings that happen there. You can have uh, community events where you are doing pancakes in the park, or I don't know what starts with O, but something in the orchard. Whatever it is, you can host your events there. You can have it as a wedding space where people are then coming to this space. You can set up, uh, track the birds. Once you have this set up, there are going to be so many birds there, and you'll have people coming to listen to the birds, and you can talk about them, and you can talk about it in the context of creation. Have a bird watching ministry. The opportunities are endless, and this is when you can lean on your community and look back at the resources and what they know about. And as far as maintenance goes, the more time you spend thinking about it maintenance ahead of time, the less you need to do. Your maintenance typically involves mowing if you're mowing the aisles, or you can do, paved walkways, you can do whatever you want to reduce your maintenance more. But mowing is typically the main part. Make sure you plan your edges. Spraying is avoidable, so you shouldn't have to do that. Collecting fallen fruits is a big one. That's how you break the disease cycle. If there's a pest in your fruit and it falls down, the next part of its life cycle is likely going into the ground and reproducing before it comes up. But you'll have some pruning, which is once a year, and then you go out in the winter and you spend a day pruning, and then you're done. You have watering, which, if you set up a watering system, is pretty well hands off. You have mulching, which is either once a year or you just do a one time plastic and that's forever. And then removing bonus plants. One of the coolest parts of maintenance, I'm experiencing this in my backyard right now. I have rows of pots of volunteer plants that I am digging up, volunteer blackberries and volunteer plums and aronia berries and sea berries, all these extra plants that are now getting potted up. So this removing of the problem is actually an opportunity to expand or to sell. And the maintenance really can be limited to a handful of activities per year aside from the mowing. So now you know a bit of what's possible on your church's property. So is your church called to care for the land that you have and to care for your neighbors? I worded this one intentionally as a bit of a trap. Of course you are. We are all called to do these things. But is this the way that God is calling you to do it? If God's not calling you to do an orchard, then don't do an orchard. Do whatever He's calling you to do. But if He is calling you to take care of your land in this way, to do an orchard, then do it. If He's doing that, then what is the next step for you? Is it to pray and talk to your church leadership and your congregation? Is it to send me an email requesting some guidance or to get an opinion on the viability of edible landscaping or a community orchard on your property? I do that for free. You can please reach out. Or you could have me come speak at your church, either on a Sunday to your congregation to talk about what this mission could look like, or on a weeknight to speak to your greater community, uh, which is a much less complex presentation, much more concise than this one, and uh, and that one can even be a fundraiser to help you get started. Or you can get on the waiting list for the 1 year program that we're doing in partnership with Rooted, which I believe if you guys were here for last month's message webinar, then that was last month's. So we're partnering together to go take people through a 1 year program of discernment and planning and looking for funding sources to walk you through this whole process of whether it is an orchard or whether it is gardens or whether it is a combination of the two. Or maybe yours is just to actually just start planting a mini orchard. Maybe you have the information that you need and you can just start. Or maybe it's something else entirely. God's plans are so much bigger than mine, and He may have something else entirely different planned for you. So, share any questions. You can go back to the live version of me and ask me questions and pick apart.